has not been focused on OER, most of which has not been focused on OER, but which will hopefully give you some provocative ideas. And I'm going to close the latter third of the talk by discussing some of the things that we are doing to try to make a difference in the open education resources space. And I'll be setting up also a talk being given a little later today by one of my colleagues with whom we work closely. That will become apparent a little later on. So, as mentioned in the introduction, I'm not an education scholar by training. I am a teaching professional. I'm a university professor, but my focus initially for the first part of my career has been on this thing, on planet Earth, and trying to understand this world in which we live, what its past was, what its future is, and could there be life elsewhere? And I began as a geoscientist studying sedimentary rocks from billions of years ago to try to understand, this big question: how did we get here? How did the planet get to be the way that it is? That kind of naturally, when you study the Earth and the Earth in its modern form and try to understand its evolution, it kind of naturally leads you to wonder whether there could be planets elsewhere that are similar to our own. So after a few years, I became an astrobiologist. I moved from becoming a geochemist to an astrobiologist, or I expanded from being a geochemist studying the Earth's past and present to asking the "Are we alone?" question. What would we be looking for elsewhere if we were trying to find a planet like Earth? How do we recognize an inhabited planet elsewhere? What are the conditions that make a planet habitable in the first place? And then as I got into that, and after I moved to Arizona State University, I began thinking a lot more about our future. And I began realizing that you can't really think about the future of Earth anymore without understanding and trying to account for and predict in some manner human behavior and what humans are going to do in the future. And that led to real interest in what is our future. And that led inevitably to thinking a lot about education, because the future behavior of us, of human beings, is shaped very strongly by our education system. And I sort of came to the conclusion that the education system is a vital Earth system as much as any other Earth system. And I became fascinated with studying that, not just as a practitioner of teaching at a university, but also as somebody who is interested in the evolution of the planet and its future. Education started to become central to that. So while my focus here is going to be very much on things that we've done as practitioners that I hope you'll learn from, that I hope you'll find at least a little bit inspiring from here, from point to point. I hope you'll also see that there's a larger scholarly thread in which this is all embedded. So when we think about Earth's future, increasingly the Earth very much is in our hands. And I could give you an hour-long talk about the evidence, the data that lead to the conclusion that the future of the planet is going to be more and more shaped by human decisions. But this isn't an environmental science and sustainability talk, so I'm not going to do that. But just suffice to say that this is not just poetry, as poetic as this image is. From my professional opinion, as somebody who studies the Earth, who studies the evolution of life, the coevolution of life in the planet, we've entered sort of an interesting evolutionary transition, a profound evolutionary transition in our planet. The emergence of beings like ourselves who are intelligent to some degree, can make tools and manipulate their environments in a very deliberate and thoughtful way is an evolutionary transition as profound as any other in the history of the planet. And I think we don't always recognize it, mostly because we're living right in the middle of it. So if we want to manage that future, if we want to manage that power that we are that we are coming to wield ever more, I won't say ever more effectively, but ever more powerfully, we need a planet of problem solvers, right? We need the future of the planet to be in the hands of people, of humans, for whom a critical mass consists of people who can navigate the uncharted waters we're headed into. We're headed into situations that humanity has never confronted before, situations in part of our own making. And so we need global citizenry that can engage with that. And not every individual is going to be capable of doing that. Not every individual is going to have the opportunities to develop into the kind of person who solves those kind of problems. But we need many, many more people than we have now who are in a position to engage and grapple with these sort of issues at the highest possible level. So how do we do that? So the education system, especially in science education, which is my focus, the education system has, for the most part, focused on knowledge transmission. That's been the main emphasis of of most of the education system. And I'm here to tell you, I think most of us know this, but it's kind of worth putting in bold on a slide, that knowledge alone is not enough. I'm just going to say that again. Knowledge alone is not enough. Thinking about education, just the transmission of content, which is often how conversations in the online learning space and OER space sometimes go, right? We think about this content that we want to make more available. That's all very important. Knowledge is obviously very critical, but knowledge alone is not enough to grapple with the challenges that we're facing. So there are a few reasons for that. So one of them is that knowledge is at our fingertips. I like to tell a story about when I was a kid. You know, my father, who was also an academic, was a very learned man. And how do we know he was a learned man? Well, when I was a kid and we'd sit around the dinner table having arguments, you know, he knew a lot of facts. He could kind of trump any argument we had with facts that were kind of at his command, just out of his mind, his incredible mind. Sometimes we'd scurry to the living room where we had some of you may remember the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? We had a couple of bookshelves full of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and as kids, we'd sometimes, you know, fact check him by, you know, pulling these bound volumes off the shelf and thumbing through and looking for information to see if he'd gotten things right, or if we could come up with some information to back up our positions. But today, you know, when I have, you know, my kids are now out of the house, but when they were little, we'd have debates at the dinner table. You know, they'd pull out their cell phone, their smartphone, and we'd all be fact checking right there and then. You know, knowledge is just right there, right? Knowledge is at our fingertips, like literally. And in some future that maybe is scary, but is probably coming, you know, we will have wearable devices that will, or maybe implantable devices that will connect us to the internet at a moment's thought without even going through our fingertips. So that's the future that we are living in and that we're headed towards. And so knowledge alone is not enough. And we know this also, you know, if we think about the jobs of the future, if we think about the future workplace, and now with all the excitement and trepidation around generative AI, we talk about this all the time, right? Knowledge is not enough in the sense that the special things that humans bring to the table is not the recall of knowledge, the recall of information. Jobs that depend on that, if you organize your life around knowing stuff, you're not going to be competitive with the machines of today, if not the machines of the future. Right? The special things that humans can do are not knowledge retrieval. So knowledge alone is not enough. It's important, obviously. You need to have some knowledge in your head, to be able to have some working knowledge to be able to do anything, but it's not the focus, can't be the sole focus of education. Knowledge is not enough in another sense as well, that I think we all know from various experiences. We know that people don't always make decisions based on knowledge. Just knowing what the right answer is to a question, knowing what a problem is, using our logic and rational thought, isn't enough to ensure that people follow what knowledge and logic tells you. You know, we are not actually the most rational beings in the world. There's a fair amount of psychology literature that will tell you that although we think that we decide what to do and come to conclusions based on rational analysis of the facts, that in fact, what we tend to do is already have sort of prior ideas of what it is that we want to do in a given situation, what our assessment is. And we tend to reason a bit more like lawyers, looking for facts to buttress our position, as opposed to looking objectively at the facts and trying to formulate our position from there. Of course, we do both, but we are much more opportunistic about how we use knowledge and unobjective than I think we'd like to believe, especially people like me who are scientists who'd like to pretend that we are dispassionate observers and analyzers of the facts. And so knowledge is not enough for that reason as well. As a scientist, you know, there's a long tradition of thinkers about science and society saying essentially the same thing. Carl Sagan, the late Carl Sagan, who I suspect most people in the audience are aware of. He was an excellent scientist who was an even better science communicator and thinker, public intellectual. He wrote this very famous book called The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. It's a very prescient book. He wrote it in the mid-90s, speaking of a world that he feared would come in the future that was, if you read that book, it's a little bit too much like the world of today. A world in which science seems to not have the upper hand in shaping the way people engage with factual challenges in the world. And Carl Sagan liked to say that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking. Science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking. And so when I think about what we need of our education system in the future, this Earth system, this education system thought of as an Earth system, what does it need to be? Well, it's not just about knowledge transmission. It has to be about transmitting a way of thinking about the world, a way of engaging the world. That has to be a major part of what we're trying to accomplish. So at ASU, we like the word exploration a lot. I'm in the School of Earth and Space Exploration, and I lead the Center for Education through Exploration. So what does that mean? Well, so exploration is a way to encapsulate in one word many of the values and thought processes that we need if we're going to get beyond just knowledge transmission and really grapple with the challenges that we face. So what is exploration? What does an explorer do? Well, exploration is about using knowledge, not just having knowledge, but using knowledge to navigate the unknown. In a very real sense, we are all explorers of the future of this planet that we are shaping and reacting to in various ways. We're explorers of the future, and we need to learn how to use knowledge to navigate that unknown. What does that mean? Well, it means things like problem solving. It means nurturing innovation. It means cultivating attitudes and practices and behaviors that we call persistence. Right? These are key attributes, key features of exploration, successful exploration, problem solving, innovation, and persistence. Not just vocabulary, equations, rules, the stuff of knowledge. Again, I phrase this very carefully as not just this. We need knowledge, of course, and human beings need to have a certain base level of knowledge in their brains as if we're going to be effective problem solvers and so on and so forth. But it's not enough. And I would submit to you that too much of our education system, and particularly when we think about the digital side of it, focuses a little too much on vocabulary, equations, rules, or it doesn't focus too much. It's just that we kind of stop there. We don't think deeply about how we do the rest of it, which is the increasingly more and more important part of it. So in our, when I got into all this 15 years ago, I came to ASU as a lecturer or as a faculty member at Public Research University. It was my first time teaching at the big public research university. I taught general chemistry, big lecture class, 200 students. I got a teaching award for it, so I guess I was doing something good. But I felt like this was a dismal teaching and learning experience because I felt like I was way too often having to deal with this, no matter how dynamic I was as a lecturer. Not that people were like literally dozing off in my lecture hall, at least I never, not that I noticed. But the model of teaching and learning that was central at that time, and that still is the baseline today, the lecture model of teaching, is not a model of teaching that inculcates those values and practices of exploration. Doesn't do a particularly good job of knowledge transmission either, for that matter, but it certainly doesn't nurture problem solving and persistence and these other sorts of behaviors. This student is obviously not in the process of being innovative right now at that moment this photo was taken. Of course, we now live in 2023, not in 2004, and the phrase active learning is on everybody's fingertips. I don't know that everybody agrees on what it is, but everybody knows the word and feels like we know it when we see it. I like to show this this slide to my friends who are scientists, my colleagues who are scientists, who tend to still think of teaching as a bit of an art, and there is an art to it, of course, but it's a science. So no less august a journal than Nature in 2015 ran this story on the science of teaching science, and with this kind of provocative phrase or full quote: "Active problem solving confers deeper understanding. At this point, it is unethical to teach any other way." This was in 2015. There's a little bit of an extreme statement to say that it's unethical to teach any other way, and there's a place and time for lecture mode of teaching, of course. But the spirit in which it was offered was in the spirit of pharmaceutical interventions. For example, if you're testing a drug and you find that you're running a controlled experiment and you find that the treatment group is doing much better than the control group, it's considered unethical to continue the study if it's already apparent in the course of the study that the treatment group is benefiting, because the ethics compel you to offer that benefit to everybody as soon as you're aware that there's clearly a benefit. And the argument was that similarly with active learning, there have been enough controlled studies already by 2015 that it was clear that done well, at least, active problem solving, active learning approaches are superior to passive learning approaches. And so to not start to figure out how to do this at scale. To not try to bring this into our teaching is unethical. Again, provocative point of view, but worth thinking about. So backed up by lots of literature. The paper in the back here by Freeman et al. Is a meta-analysis already from 2014 of some 200 studies showing in aggregate that indeed active learning leads to superior results. Today we focus also very much on inclusion and equity, and we have ample research that shows that active learning also can be a really powerful tool in equalizing the classroom and giving opportunities for those who are often marginalized to speak up and engage and learn at a faster pace than would otherwise happen. So active learning is a very important part of how we do this. But how we do this at scale, right? So this is an OER conference. So we're interested in lowering costs, but we're also interested in lowering costs in ways that scale, right? The essence of a digital textbook, just to take the simplest kind of OER, is that you can scale it much more readily than a paper textbook, because the marginal cost of making copies is essentially zero, and of spreading around once you have the internet is essentially zero. So we're all interested in scale as well as cost. And so when we think about active learning, how do we take active learning and scale that? Well, that's a really interesting challenge that kind of, when I started thinking about this in the mid-2000s, kind of made me freak out and talk to lots of people, and nobody really had great solutions. And it's very interesting. Even today, this slide still holds true, and it very much held true when the first wave of online learning really started about 10, 12 years ago. We have this interesting dichotomy of two technologies, a tale of two technologies. On the left is typical education technology. The video lecture, the PowerPoint slide, what we're doing right now here, the multiple choice test in Canvas, and so on and so forth. These are essentially virtualizations of the passive learning lecture style, right? What we're doing right now is essentially, it's a virtualization of me being there giving you a lecture. I mean, being there giving you a lecture, well, at one time, if I'm a good speaker, great. But 3 hours a week for 15 weeks, we know that's not a great learning experience. So virtualizing that, has its benefits, of course. You're widening access tremendously, and even I would say today, even the base level online class offers some active learning features that were not in the old lecture style classroom, but too often this sort of knowledge transmission mode of learning is at the core of the learning experience online. So that's education technology on the left. Meanwhile, on the right is typical entertainment technology, which from its earliest days, the use of computers in education, the use of computers in entertainment, was far more dynamic and engaging and active than the use of the same technology in education. If you think about it, a good video game is an intensely active learning experience. Lots and lots of tricks are being played, are being implemented to get your attention and to keep your attention and to help you learn things that are important in that gaming environment. It's a learning system, right? What you're learning is not anything usually that's going to be of particular value to you later on in your life, or even once you turn off the computer and end that game. But you are learning a lot about how to navigate a complex gaming environment, how to solve problems within a particular context, and all sorts of psychological tricks are being played on you to compel you to continue. So part of what we went into in the center was to figure out how can we make education a bit more like the technology on the right and a little less like the technology implementation on the left. And that's still the center of what we're doing. So we began with virtual field trips. I'm a scientist, I'm an earth scientist. We go to all sorts of special locations around the world. So we began with trying to figure out how can we take media at locations. This is the Grand Canyon, obviously. And you're seeing here various forms of media. This is a gigapan image that it's a stitched together image of thousands of megapixel images, allowing you to do things you couldn't do actually in real life, to basically fly across the canyon and look in great detail to the other side. We can go to multiple locations here. This is all, by the way, web delivered, right? So one of the philosophies of our center is we're trying to do things that can scale. So we're interested in VR. We've played a little bit with it, but it still doesn't scale. The technology is too fussy, it's too clunky, it's too expensive. Everything we do, we want to deliver through a web browser. So we began by building these sort of virtual field trips, not knowing too much about education, but thinking this is really cool. Let's get these kind of experiences out there to enable people who will never have a chance to do a river trip down the Grand Canyon or to go to the Hamersley Basin in Western Australia, which is a fascinating place, or other places around the world. People will never have a chance to go to these places, give them an opportunity to experience it as more than just a set of photographs. So we began with that as a way to do this. And then we started branching off into simulations. So this is a simulation from a course called Habitable Worlds we created a number of years ago and continue to refine. This is teaching you about the production of elements in stars. You're seeing a star evolve here, go through a late part of its evolution, during which lots of elements are synthesized. That bar graph on the right is showing you elements being produced, chemical elements being produced in the stellar environment. So we use this simulation as a way of teaching about where the elements that make up the planet and make up us come from. And this is in a science course, quantitative lab science course for non-science majors. We also use this in an introductory astronomy class. So we were building virtual field trips and simulations, and these are great, they're cool. They're certainly interactive, which is a form of activity. And you can do experiments within these systems. So you can create learning plans, lesson plans that get students to engage in problem-solving behaviors. Go higher up Bloom's taxonomy than before. But we learned pretty quickly that just putting these amazing environments in front of people isn't enough. A video game, to go back to the gaming metaphor, doesn't just put people inside some kind of fantastic environment and give them some spectacular stimulation in front of them. What you need to do is guide the learner through the experience with lots of formative feedback, a lot of try and fail before you succeed, with help along the way to help you learn how to succeed. What we're talking about here is tutoring, right? You need to somehow tutor the learner through the experience. So you create an interactive, but to have it be a truly powerful learning experience, it's not just enough to have an interactive environment. You need to also help tutor the learner through the complexities of that environment and the complexities of the problem-solving task that you put in front of them. And we all know this as humans, as parents, as well as teachers. What this parent is doing is tutoring their child through a complex problem-solving activity by helping them figure out which puzzle pieces go together, right? So tutoring is this very innate thing. It's how we learn about the world effectively. And so it's what we need to be doing in our learning experiences when we create these fantastic online experiences. So when you think about tutoring and try to break it down so that you can try to think about how you can do things digitally, technologically, we're actually talking about something very simple conceptually, right? So you have the learner in some sort of context. It could be in the context of a virtual field trip where they have to explore in order to figure something out. It can be a simulation-based thing. It can even be a conversation when the Socratic kind of teaching method, where the learner has to make a decision. The learner has to make a decision, and based on the nature of their decision, you somehow, the tutor or the software system behind the scenes, determines whether the learner needs tutoring or not. Are they making the right decision for that given moment? Are they giving the right answer to the question? Are they on the right path or not? If they need tutoring, which is to say, if they are not making the decision that you want them to make or that you hope they'll make, then you send them into some sort of a tutoring system, some sort of experience that is then giving them an opportunity to acquire the information that they need, or to learn the thought process or concept that they need to learn. That comes in the way of providing also feedback. The tutoring system inevitably involves providing some sort of formative feedback to the learner. It can be in the form of hints as well as other things that allows the learner to make the decision again. And one again goes through the same process until the student doesn't need tutoring, makes the correct choice, and now you go on to the next decision. Same loop, and so on and so forth, right? So a rich learning experience involving tutoring is a series of these sorts of loops in a series of steps. And in a digital tutoring context, we can think about this as step-based adaptive digital tutoring, right? You put the student in an environment, in a situation where, if it's an online system, where they have the opportunity to interact and to get feedback based on interaction, and have to make decisions. And at each step, you are interrogating what the student is doing and then providing them feedback as needed to help them make the right decision and move on to the next step. The step-based adaptive digital tutoring. And if you think about it, we had somebody on our team in the ETX Center at one point who was a software developer who had a background as a game designer, and he led us in a little workshop where he asked us, what's a game? What is a game? And we gave a bunch of ideas. And his distillation of what a game is a game is essentially, at its essence, it's an interesting or compelling series of decisions, of choices that you have to make as you move through some sort of experience. That's the essence of what a good game is. And so in a sense, we're gamifying. I hesitate to use that word, but this is, the reason that video game is compelling, because you're doing this over and over and over again, and you don't even realize that's what's happening. Right? You're making decisions, you're getting feedback, you're being tutored into a particular path that leads to success in that game, and it's happening over and over and over again in various contexts as you move through the experience. And it's compelling, and you want to keep doing it. So can we create learning experiences that are like that? How do we wrap that kind of experience around interactives? And in the jargon of the field, it's how do we implement step-based adaptive digital tutoring in software systems? We started with a company called Smart Sparrow, was our partner in figuring this out a dozen years ago or so, but there's others out there, Cogbooks, the Open Learning Initiative we'll talk more about later, who have built what are called intelligent tutoring systems. These are step-based tutoring systems, and it's nothing new, right? So there's a annual or semi-annual conference in intelligent tutoring systems that's been going on for, at this point, 35 years. So this is actually a mature area of inquiry in a scholarly manner. And it turns out, as I got into this, one of the gurus of this field, Kurt Van Lane, who wrote the book, The Behavior of Tutoring Systems, which is all about this. Is actually my colleague at ASU, was originally at University of Pittsburgh. So as an area of scholarship, this is actually a pretty mature area. But as an area of actual implementation, it's practical. It's still maturing and has gone through various problems in the last decade. The world of adaptive tutoring platforms, mostly driven by publishers, as well as some small companies like Smart Sparrow and Cogbooks and initiatives like the Open Learning Initiative. In terms of actually getting systems out there that are routine and easy to use, that's been slow. That's where we've been in the last decade, is learning about that and figuring out how to implement this, and then trying to start, I'll be immodest and say what we're on the cusp of is trying to start a revolution where we can make these systems low cost, so that they can start to have an impact on the world of OER and the sort of OER adjacent world of, if not free, then at least very low cost systems. We know these systems can be quite effective. Comparison of digital and human tutoring. On the right here is a human tutor. On the left is no tutor. An answer-based tutor that's just giving you feedback on sort of end answers. And here's step-based tutoring that tutors you along the way. And you can see that step-based digital tutoring, if you get things fine-grained enough, is comparable to human tutoring in its effectiveness. This is in mathematics. There hasn't been quite as much study in other areas, but I think the principle is going to hold. So we started building, starting about 10 years ago, different sorts of adaptive tutoring experiences with intelligent tutoring systems, with Smart Sparrow in particular. So here's a simulation in which students are building the DNA molecule, and they're learning which bases go with which. And they're doing it in a learn by doing way with adaptive feedback, right? So the system there just gave feedback to the student about the fact that they did not pair the right bases. That's an example of a one step in a multi-step learning process where the system is actually monitoring what the student is doing, and at the right moment is giving the student feedback about what they're doing wrong and why. Another example here quickly is in a virtual field trip. This is one of my favorite virtual field trips. It takes you to the location in Italy, Gubbio, Italy, where scientists learned that a meteorite impact wiped out the dinosaurs. Here, the learner goes here and they get to pick up a slightly fictitious chemical X-ray tool, and they get to explore this outcrop of rock. The student here is collecting data as they go across. You can see the data being plotted on the left. And the student then is asked a question, which point here is different? Where is the data different than everywhere else? And in this data set, they're all the same. So the student just kind of guesses, as students often do. And they get feedback that says, no, that's incorrect. You need to go get more data. So the system is watching what the student's doing, right? And oh, the student missed this kind of key point where there's a huge enrichment of the chemical element iridium, which is what tells us that there was a big meteorite that hit the Earth at the time the dinosaurs wiped out. So now the student finds that data point, they answer the question correctly, and now they move on to another question that asks them to start interpreting the graph that they're seeing, or at least reading the graph that they're seeing. And you're seeing just a couple of steps in an hour-long learning experience that gets the student from knowing nothing about this period of time and this rock outcrop and other rock outcrops like it that tell us about what happened at this time. Takes them from knowing nothing about this to actually calculating what was the size of that meteorite that hit the Earth, that rock chunk. How big did it have to be to account for the evidence that we see, and what were the biological consequences of that? And you could just prepare a lecture and just give the students that information in an hour, but alternatively, you can do what we're doing, which is actually have them problem solve along the way. So they get the same information, but they do get it in a way that requires and compels them to think through the evidence, to apply their critical thinking and reasoning skills, and to essentially develop as problem solvers, which is, to go back to what we were talking about before, that's sort of one of the essences of exploration is problem solving. And so we try to build these experiences that scale. Again, this is all through a web browser, and that use rich digital media, but that learn a little bit from the entertainment world to create experiences that are tutoring students to success in rich problem-solving kind of ways that inculcate these skills of exploration. Here's another one. This is fantastically complicated. We haven't done another one of these, but this is, and you can do this one in TrueVR if you want. This is a somewhat gamified exploration of the cell, the eukaryotic cell, where the student is not simply seeing what's there, but is actually, they have a task. They have to figure out how to get a nerve cell to fire. And so they have to learn kind of by trial and error with feedback and hints, where the glucose molecule has to go inside the cell, and what has to happen for glucose, sugar molecules, to be turned into energy that can then cause a nerve cell to fire. So this is, it's a fantastical 3D environment. Everything is to scale and as scientifically accurate as we can make it in a web deliverable format. It's really, really cool. Conceptually, what's going on here is exactly what I showed you before and what I showed you in that schematic diagram. It's just step-based digital tutoring. It's at every step, the student has to do something. They get feedback based on what they do, but it's done in a way that is rich and immersive and does not feel like you're going through a tutoring experience. It feels like you are like you're on a quest trying to do something and you're figuring out as you go in a way that's intriguing and compelling to continue. So this is to do something like this, just the graphical imagery was pretty complicated to try to put together. But this gives you a sense of the kind of thing that we aspire to do and that we sometimes manage to pull off. Now, to do this is to build these things is complex. As you can imagine, going through any one of these things, there's a lot of decision branches going on here. There's a complex design, what we call learning design. This is a little bit of a sketch from one of our more complicated digital learning experiences, right? So you need designers who can think through logically, well, what do I want the student to do next? And what happens next? And what feedback should they get, right? And this is not computer programming, but it is a very logical kind of thought process about learning. It is a sort of engineering approach to learning with a certain artistry to it. So we call this learning design. So our team, very fundamentally, is a team of learning designers. We have within the center a model that we think about when we try to do these designs, build these experiences. We call it the ETX model of learning design. We want to do things that fire the learner's curiosity, right, that pique their interest. It has to start, and this is where rich media comes in and interactives come in, something that really gets you going, makes you want to click, to touch the screen, to do the next thing. And then that should flow into then a structured exploration of some sort, a structured interrogation of the environment with feedback in the form of, backed by digital tutoring system. This is the structured part, and we call this exploration, but it's tutored exploration. It's guided inquiry learning based on what you were curious about with some kind of task that you have to accomplish. You have this exploration arc of the circle, and exploration should always lead to some form of discovery. That can be as simple as the aha moment that you figured something out. It can be a reward within the environment. Maybe you get a digital coin of some sort, some kind of digital certificate, something that gives you a sense of, yeah, I accomplished this and I've got a tangible reward for it. Something to give you that emotional lift that makes you want to ask the next question, right? In this kind of positive feedback loop. So we aim to design things that have this sort of essence behind them. So we built a large number of these sorts of things for a variety of projects. You can go to any one of these. These are all open websites where you can go and explore these things. But what I want to pivot to in the remaining 10 minutes or so here is to talk about OER. This is an OER conference. And what I've shown you here is stuff that is expensive and difficult and complicated to do, and as inspiring as you might think some of it is. I hope you think some of it is. You might be asking yourself, okay, how is this relevant to what I want to do with open education resources? And so I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what we've been doing in that direction, because it's bothered us, right? I sit here at ASU, huge public research university. We're doing these things, we're making them at least very accessible through a web browser, but they're not inexpensive to build. And figuring out how to financially sustain these things is always a challenge. And we look at the publisher world, which does things that are, frankly, we think not as good as what we're doing, but charges a lot for them. And so we try to think about, well, how can we do things that can take some of the essence of what we're discovering in our center and infuse it into the world of open education resources. So one of the things that we're doing that I'm going to talk about very briefly here, because there's a longer talk about it later today, is the InSpark OER project. InSpark is one of our initiatives that we've started with SmartSphere, actually, around sophisticated courseware. But we've developed in the last few years with funding from the Department of Education an OER initiative within InSpark, where the philosophy was, what we convinced the Department of Ed to help us to try to do, is to figure out how can we build software components that we can make available to those who are using OER, software components that can be offered as low possible cost as we can get away with, that can be paired with OER course materials. So software technologies and tools that will enable OER to step up a little bit, to raise its bar a little bit into more active learning experiences. And we conceptualize this in the world of digital text, right? Thinking about most OER at the time, certainly, and I think even today, is essentially digital text. So what can we do to provide tools that can allow an instructor to make that digital text come alive more and be more adaptive and active around it? David Schoenstein, a little later today, if you look up his name this afternoon, I think is going to give a full talk about the InSpark OER tools. I'm not going to talk about them at any length here. He'll show them off a little bit. But we developed four tools, Chart It, Review It, Plan It, and Tour It, that are these kind of modular tools that integrate into the LMS that enable you to teach skills of numeracy, of organization, reading comprehension, critique, and Tour It is really pretty cool. So it's kind of a creative production tool that enables instructors and or students to build virtual tours that are pretty cool. These are all tools that are available now at very low cost. Well, right now they're available essentially all but free through the grant, but beyond that, they've been designed to be offerable as low a cost as we can get away with. There is, of course, a challenge in the OER world of to what extent OER has to be absolutely free. The reality is, our posture is that you can't do these kind of sophisticated tools that sit on cloud servers and actually have them be truly free. You can make them low enough cost that institutions can pay for them, so the student doesn't bear the cost. We think that's really important, and that's kind of the sweet spot we're going for. Or you pass the cost along to the student, but in a way that's very reasonable, not the sort of $100 book kind of thing, or even for these tools, even a $40 digital book sort of thing, but try to get the cost even lower than that. So we're always pushing in that direction. These tools are built with that in mind. So again, David Schoenstein will give you a much deeper look at these tools. So check out his presentation. Another major thing we're doing in the digital learning space for the open education community stems out of this project. So this is a NASA project called Infiniscope. These experiences are available free, at least for the life of the grant. We have to figure out what to do beyond this grant. But this is now a 10-year project that we've been on building interactive, adaptive, tutored learning experiences that are available free. These are for high school and entry college science learning experiences. When we originally built these, as you can see in the bottom here, these are all powered by SmartSparrow. These were all built on the adaptive intelligent tutoring system of SmartSparrow, which was a small startup company that 3 years ago was bought by Pearson. And so we had to figure out what we were going to do. Do we fold up shop or what? We were dependent on a proprietary for-profit company run by good guys, but still not OER at all. And so we decided, no, we're not going to fold up shop. We're going to figure out a way to bring this into some sort of an open source nonprofit technology model. And we were fortunate enough to be connected with the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University, which had just embarked on a venture to build a platform called Taurus, which was intended to be an open source nonprofit digital learning platform for intelligent tutoring for sophisticated learning engineering driven learning experiences. So we teamed up with them. We threw in a lot of our NASA money to expand the Taurus project to be able to accommodate the sort of interactivity, simulation driven, virtual field trip driven things that you just saw that we've done with SmartSparrow. And we've done it. We've now, as of last year, we've migrated all our legacy experiences over to the Taurus platform. So everything now sits, all the things I've shown you actually now sit on an open source tutoring platform. And the value of open source, right, is that nobody owns the IP, because everybody owns the IP of the underlying platform, which means it can't go away, can't disappear. And the community can get together to try to offer these things at the lowest possible cost, because there's no profit being extracted from the infrastructure platform, which is, frankly, if you think about the way most of the internet works, right? Most of the technologies we're using at the core are these open source platforms on which people build all sorts of profit-driven things, but the fundamental infrastructure tends to be open source. So that's what we're trying to do with adaptive learning, or what we've done it actually. So this platform enables us to, and you, anybody who wants to create and modify sophisticated learning experiences, to share and deploy them, and to assess and analyze what works. And that leads then to a virtuous cycle where learning designers can create and modify things and deploy them. STEM learners engage them, generating data that learning scientists can then assess and analyze to figure out what works best. And so open source is also powerful because by getting rid of the IP complications and by lowering costs as much as possible, we can get to the largest possible scale. That's the vision. And scale is what you need to really do this kind of learning science research properly. The contexts of learning are so heterogeneous and so complicated that you need large scale in order to be able to see through all the contextual complexity. And no adaptive learning platform has gotten to anything close to the right scale. So our hope is that Taurus, because of its open source nature and the nonprofit structures we're building around it, will be able to get to a scale that will enable us to really start to learn in a deep way what works and what doesn't for what population of students in what kind of learning context, and then be able to use that information to design and iteratively improve these digital learning experiences and keep them at the lowest practical cost. Again, obviously there's a lot of sophistication here. This can't be free. Somebody has to pay for it somehow, but you can get the cost down to the point where either you amortize it across so many students that it's not a big burden for each student, if it's a student, students bearing the cost, or it's low enough cost that institutions can justify supporting the technology and the learning around it. So I'm just going to close. So what did this virtual cycle do? So it reduces barriers to creation, customization, and use by having an open source platform. It enables iterative improvement because you can have this kind of virtuous cycle. This is important. You can decentralize development. So this platform is not simply a platform to execute things that are difficult to build. It's also a platform that has authoring tools that makes it relatively easy to build ever more sophisticated learning experiences. Some things still need a developer, but the essential logic of these experiences, the tutoring, the feedback that learners get, the platform is designed to make it as easy as possible. And we're developing actually tools right now to make it even easier to decentralize that teaching part of it, that learning design part of it. We think that's very important because we think different learners in different contexts need different things, and those central designers are going to be able to meet all the needs. And in so doing, we then empower diverse communities, right? A research university, a liberal arts college, an HBCU, a community college, some sort of a innovative independent learner kind of implementation. You need different sorts of tutorings for those different kinds of environments and different kinds of learning experiences. So we need to have platforms that can enable diversification for diverse communities. And as I said, if we get this right, then we get to a scale where we can really, as a community of practitioners, learn what works best, be informed by learning science, and get somewhere really positive. And then the final thing, I think I'm probably out of time, so I'm not going to walk you through any kind of demo, but the latest thing we're doing in this space is building on this Taurus platform, as we have funding now from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to build a new generation of STEM courseware. We're calling it, the working title is REAL for relevant, engaging, active learning. That is courseware in the basic sciences, chemistry, introductory physics, and so on is the vision, starting with chemistry as our first project. So we're designing this courseware around best of breed OER and OER evolved materials. That's, in fact, right, the chemistry course is built around, aligned with the OpenStax chemistry, general chemistry textbook, and built evolving out of the OLI general chemistry courseware suite, which is some of you may be familiar with. So we take these OER derived materials and build active learning around them, and in particular then build experiences around them that help students see the relevance of what they're learning while they're being supported by an intelligent tutoring system that is responsive to their needs and desires. So this is a project that's very, very well along. We have our beta version of the chemistry course will be out next January. And this is a project that sort of brings together many of the threads that I've been talking about in a way that will be, again, as low cost as possible to try to impact the open education space and sort of the OER adjacent space. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I have another 10 minutes I could go demoing some of this, but we don't have time for that. But if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to walk you through it at some point down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anbar. It was very, very amazing talk. And, you know, as we discuss open education resources, and we see that open education resources encourage faculty to involve current and related content that encourage engagement. And I was very happy to see that we're looking at engagement and active learning and how OER can really improve. And I know we have a lot of researchers, scholars, educators, and learners in our audience, and I would love to see if there's any questions from our audience. You can type in the chat, and we can. There's a question for you. Do you think any of the step-based digital learning software can be adapted to the humanities?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I think any learning experience that you can break down into a. Sorry. I think any learning experience that you can break down into a series of choices and decisions that a student has to make is amenable to this sort of pedagogy and enabled by this sort of technology. You know, my background is in STEM, and I think a lot of the people who have come into this technology come from STEM backgrounds. And of course, when we think about workforce, the focus is so often around STEM success. So that's kind of where a lot of us go. And certainly those who come from the world of math, you know, there are certain subjects like math that really lend themselves to step-based tutoring where you can really diagnose what's going on based on how well a student answers a question. It gets more complicated when you get into humanities, let's say. But I think you can certainly imagine scenarios where you can teach powerfully important humanities concepts in this way. And I think I didn't mention seriously AI in this talk at all, but I'm pretty excited by what generative AI is going to be bringing to that table, right? Because the big challenge, you know, our challenge as learning designers has been for so long, you know, that we can't interact with students through natural language because the systems don't know how to recognize natural language, right? So we end up with interactives that involve moving levers on simulations or doing drag and drop problems or multiple choice questions or things like that. You know, we sort of constrain the interactives to be things that a machine can interpret so that we can provide formative feedback, right? And every once in a while we try to have free response questions where a student types something in and we kind of say, well, we can have this, we can look for keywords, but that's kind of clunky because there's a lot of different ways to say things. And so we tend to shy away from those things. But now large language models are changing the game on that, right? So I'm very excited about what the future of generative AI is for exactly this sort of thing, for being able to create step-based digital tutoring where the interaction is with sophisticated natural language, which I think will be a real boon for the humanities. And this is what these systems are good for, right? If you try to ask, GPT-4 is better than GPT-3, but if you try to ask these systems math questions, or technical STEM questions, they'll get things wrong quite a lot because they'll hallucinate. But they're fantastic with humanities style questions and discourse. They're kind of freaky good, right? Because they're trained on they're trained on words, they're trained on vocabulary, they're trained on rhetoric, and so they're really good rhetorical conversation systems.
I agree. I have tested a few of them and it works pretty well. So any other questions? It seems like there are no questions. Thank you, Dr. Anbar. It was an amazing session and we learned a lot from you, and we're looking forward to more collaboration with ASU.